On August 12, 2000, a crew of 118 Russian sailors woke up for the last time. Within hours, their submarine would be ripped apart by explosions so powerful they registered on seismographs across northern Europe. Some of those men survived the blasts. They crawled into the dark, flooded compartments at the stern, sealed the hatches behind them, and wrote goodbye letters to their families. And then the Russian government told the world everything was fine. This is the story of the Kursk, not just a submarine disaster, a catastrophe made infinitely worse by pride, secrecy, and the lethal cost of a government that chose its own image over the lives of its sailors. The Kursk was not some aging relic of the Soviet fleet. She was a monster, an Oscar II-class nuclear-powered cruise missile submarine, 505 feet long, displacing over 18,000 tons submerged. She carried 24 anti-ship cruise missiles designed to sink American aircraft carriers. When she was commissioned in 1994, she was one of the most powerful warships on the planet. Her crew called her unsinkable. The Russian Navy considered her a crown jewel. She was the pride of the Northern Fleet, and in August of 2000, she sailed into the Barents Sea for a major naval exercise meant to prove that Russia's military was still a force to be feared. The exercises were high profile. Senior naval commanders were watching. The Kursk was scheduled to fire a practice torpedo on the morning of August 12th. At 11:28 local time, something went catastrophically wrong. Norwegian seismic monitors recorded the first explosion at a magnitude of 1.5. That was the initial detonation, likely a malfunction inside one of the Kursk's practice torpedoes, which used hydrogen peroxide as fuel. Hydrogen peroxide torpedoes were already notorious. The fuel is dangerously unstable. A leak, a faulty seal, a corroded weld, anything could set it off. And at 11:28, it did. The first explosion was bad. What came next was apocalyptic. 2 minutes and 15 seconds later, the seismic stations recorded a second blast, magnitude 3.5. That is roughly equivalent to a small earthquake. What had happened was the initial fire triggered a chain reaction that detonated between 5 and 7 warhead-equipped torpedoes simultaneously. The bow of the Kursk was obliterated. Compartments 1 through 3 were destroyed instantly. A wall of fire, pressure, and seawater tore through the forward section of the submarine at unimaginable speed. The Kursk plunged nose first into the seabed at a depth of 350 feet. 23 sailors survived those first seconds. They were stationed in the aft compartments behind the nuclear reactors. They managed to seal the bulkhead doors and retreat into compartment 9, the farthest section from the explosions. They were alive. But they were sitting on the bottom of the Barents Sea with no propulsion, no communication, and the cold Arctic water slowly seeping in. Here is where this story becomes something more than a disaster. It becomes a scandal. The Russian Navy did not acknowledge the Kursk was missing for more than 16 hours. When they finally admitted the submarine had sunk, they told the press that they had established communication with the crew by tapping on the hull. That was a lie. They said their own rescue teams were handling it. That was also misleading. The rescue submersibles Russia sent down were outdated, poorly maintained, and repeatedly failed to dock with the Kursk's escape hatch. Attempt after attempt, failure after failure. Precious hours burning away while 23 men huddled in the dark, breathing air that was slowly turning toxic. Norway and Britain offered to send their own deep-sea rescue teams almost immediately. Russia said no. For 5 agonizing days, the Russian government refused international assistance while their own equipment failed over and over again. The entire world was watching. Families of the crew were begging for answers, and the Kremlin stayed silent, or worse, lied. It was not until August 17th, 5 full days after the sinking, that Russia finally accepted help from Norway and Britain. Norwegian divers reached the Kursk on August 21st. They opened the aft escape hatch within hours of arriving. But when they entered the submarine, they found what everyone feared. Every man aboard was dead. The 23 survivors in compartment 9 had not died instantly. Forensic evidence and recovered notes confirmed they lived for several hours after the explosions, possibly as long as 6 to 8 hours. One officer, Captain Lieutenant Dmitry Kolesnikov, wrote a note in the dark that was later recovered from his body. It listed the names of the 23 survivors and ended with words to his wife. The exact contents remained partly classified, but the portion released confirmed they were alive, conscious, and waiting for rescue that would not come in time. If you're learning something from this story, or if it's making you think about how disasters like this happen, take a second to hit subscribe. These are the kinds of stories that deserve to be told in full, and your support helps make that possible. Now, let me tell you the part of this story that made the whole world furious. When the families of the Kursk's crew confronted Russian officials at a public meeting demanding the truth, the scene was explosive. One mother, Nadezhda Tylik, stood screaming at a military official on live television. She was forcibly sedated by a woman who walked up behind her and injected her with a tranquilizer. On camera, in front of the world. The image became a symbol of everything wrong with Russia's handling of the disaster. A grieving mother was silenced by her own government rather than given honest answers. President Vladimir Putin, who had just taken office earlier that year, was on vacation at a Black Sea resort when the Kursk sank. He did not return to Moscow for 5 days. When he finally addressed the nation, his response was cold and defensive. Asked by Larry King in a CNN interview what happened to the submarine, Putin smiled and said one word: "It sank." That two-word answer became infamous. It captured the callousness of a government more concerned with avoiding embarrassment than saving lives or honoring the dead. The official investigation concluded that a faulty torpedo using high-test peroxide fuel was the cause of the initial explosion. Russia had continued using this volatile propellant despite warnings from its own engineers, and despite the fact that most Western navies had abandoned it decades earlier as too dangerous. Cost-cutting and institutional inertia had kept a known hazard in active service. The men of the Kursk paid the price. But questions remained. Some Russian officials initially blamed a collision with a foreign submarine, pointing to the presence of American and British vessels monitoring the exercises. An international investigation found no evidence supporting this theory. Others questioned whether the survivors in Compartment 9 could have been saved if Russia had accepted foreign help immediately. Norwegian divers opened the hatch in a matter of hours. If they had been allowed to begin on August 12th instead of August 21st, the math is simple and devastating. The Kursk was eventually raised from the seabed in October of 2001 in one of the most complex salvage operations ever attempted. The bodies of all 118 crew members were recovered. The bow, too damaged and too dangerous to lift, was cut away and left on the ocean floor before the hull was raised. Russia awarded the entire crew the Order of Courage posthumously. A memorial was erected in the naval city of Murmansk. But for the families, no medal and no monument could replace what was taken from them. Not just their sons and husbands and fathers, but the truth. Delivered too late, wrapped in lies, and offered only after the world forced it into the open. The Kursk disaster did not just expose a mechanical failure, it exposed a system that valued secrecy over survival, a chain of command that would rather let men die than admit it needed help. 118 sailors went to sea aboard a submarine their navy called unsinkable, and when the unthinkable happened, their country looked away. That is the true tragedy of the Kursk, not just how they died, but how easily some of them might have been saved.